Very quickly, we're going to review the four major civil rights victories that we've studied thus far. The first one came in 1954 in the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court ruling, where the Supreme Court ruled that all public schools had to be desegregated. And this was the first major step towards civil rights in our country. The second major victory in the civil rights movement that we studied came in 1955, a year later, in the Montgomery bus boycott. It was sparked by Rosa Parks. It was led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And for over a year, the African American community boycotted riding the public transportation system in Montgomery. And in 1956, the Supreme Court ruled that the segregated buses were unconstitutional, and this was a major victory in desegregating the bus system in Montgomery. A tremendous victory, and really the second major victory in the civil rights movement. 2 years later, in 1957, we'll see the third major victory. In Little Rock, Arkansas, there were 9 black students that wanted to attend previously the all-white high school at Central High School in Little Rock, and the governor of Arkansas refused to allow these 9 students to attend. He sent in the National Guard of Arkansas to prevent them from attending. And the president at the time, President Eisenhower, saw this in the news and on television, and he sent in federal troops to protect the 9 students so they could go to the high school for that year. Because by law, remember in 1954, they were allowed to attend this public high school. 4 years later, in 1961, we see the Freedom Riders. The Freedom Riders were a group of activists that set out from the North to go into the South to challenge the segregated bus system in our country. They traveled from the North, they went into the South, they got into Anniston, Alabama, if you remember, and one of their buses was firebombed and destroyed. Then they went into Birmingham, where they met resistance, along with Montgomery, where they met violence, and they finally got to Jackson, Mississippi, where many of them were arrested and sent to jail. But after protesting this and gaining notoriety, the Freedom Riders were able to eventually get the public transportation system in the South desegregated. So that was a major step towards the civil rights movement. Now, today we're going to focus on a fifth major victory in the civil rights movement, and this was really the turning point of the civil rights. Up to this point, there were some victories, but they weren't as many as Dr. King had hoped. They weren't going as quickly as he had hoped or smoothly, and so Dr. King decided to go all in the civil rights movement. He decided he wanted to go into the most racially segregated city in the South, which was Birmingham, Alabama. There were so many unsolved bombings in Birmingham of African American homes and churches that it was nicknamed Bombingham. And he wanted to go in and have his civil rights protest, his sit-ins, his peaceful protest, and his nonviolent protest. But the chief police of Birmingham, Alabama was Eugene Bull Connor, and he was a racist, and he got a court order to ban any demonstration and any protest. So the adults of Birmingham, when they went to protest, they were violating this court order and they were violating the law. Well, Dr. King said, this is perfect. We are going to violate this unjust law intentionally. And the adults were arrested, but they were concerned when they were put in jail that they would be in there for so long that they might not be able to keep their job. They might not be able to pay their home mortgage and lose their home. They might lose their job, so they were reluctant to go to jail. So Dr. King decided to lead by example, and he violated this court order not to protest, and he was put in jail. After a few days in jail, he wrote a letter to some white clergymen, white pastors and ministers in Birmingham that were criticizing Dr. King for leading this peaceful protest. And they said, you need to be more patient. And Dr. King, in this, what became known as the letter from Birmingham jail, he said that we can't wait any longer. Now is the time. We need to act. We need to act peacefully. We need to act with sit-ins. We need to act with nonviolent protests. And we need to disobey unjust laws. Well, when he got out of jail, the adults were again reluctant to go to jail and to potentially lose their home or lose their jobs. So their children were the ones that stepped in. They were the ones that said, hey, we can lead this march. We can do this peacefully. And what they did was on May 2nd, 1963, they skipped school, they left school, and they marched to downtown Birmingham. And the first day, over 900 students were arrested and put into jail. This was called D-Day. Then the next day, on May 3rd, 1963, it was called Double D-Day. And Eugene Bull Connor, the racist fire and police chief, he brought out German shepherds and fire hoses to intimidate and to attack the protesters, the children of Birmingham. You can see here some firemen with their hoses hosing down the peaceful protesters. Here's a picture of a German shepherd attacking a protester. And the thing was, this was all caught on camera by news people, and they put all this on television, and for the first time all this information was going into the homes of Americans all across the nation, and millions of people watched this for the first time, and they saw the violence and they saw the atrocities that were occurring in the South. And this really put a lot of pressure on the American government to step in and do something. The president at the time in 1963 was John F. Kennedy, and he saw this in the newspapers, he saw this on television. He said, this is making me sick. This is an atrocity. This is a moral issue. And he addressed the people of the United States on television in a very famous address the next month in June of 1963, saying that he was going to send a proposal to the United States Congress to have them enact a civil rights legislation to end segregation in the United States. And this became known as the Children's March.